Good evening. Let's begin here. The Public Service Commission, in partnership with the Department of Public Service and Administration, the National School of Government and the United Nations Development Programme, are currently hosting a two-day retreat on the national framework towards the professionalization of the public sector. Key stakeholders have gathered to collectively unpack the most effective means to implement the various proposals and recommendations to the Professionalisation Framework. And now joining us for this topic and to discuss it a bit more further is Professor Mashupye Maserumule, who is a Commissioner of the National Planning Commission, Dr. Ayodele Odusola, who is the Resident Representative for the United Nations Development Programme, and Professor Mandla Makhanya, a Commissioner at the Public Service Commission. Perhaps let's start here. Professor Mandla Makhanya, we know that you are holding this two-day seminar, and of course it will discuss the professionalization in the public sector. Why did you see it necessary to have this retreat?
Well, I must say it's necessary for us to have this retreat because we've actually traveled a long way in terms of the professionalization of our sector. The work that started back in 2021 reached its fruition when the framework was adopted by our government last year in October. So what then is critical for us at this point in time is to work on the implementation of this professionalization so that it's not simply just a question of excitement about the road traveled, to that point, but of what this professionalization is all about.
And Dr. Ayodele, coming to you, of course, we've seen there are various challenges plaguing our country's public sector. What would say, what role does political appointments play? And, when it comes to how harmful it can be to government, can you unpack that a bit more further for us?
Yeah, thank you very much, Bali. When it comes to public service professionalization, it is the real core of implementing ethical and developmental state. And there's hardly any country where you don't have political involvement in the public service. But what we need to do is the delineation between the politicians and the public servant. In this regard, the objective is for us to really see how can we ensure that there is no interference between what the leadership of the public service will be doing, as well as what political parties will be doing. The allegiance of public servant is to the country, not to any political party or to any politician. And that's why the issue of ethical standard becomes very important. And that's why it will be able to make sure that the governance structure, the norms that will be governing the public service is apolitical. And in this regard, it is not allowed, it doesn't allow a situation where political interference will be recurring on a regular basis. So the essence of this is to ensure that while political commitment is needed in implementing public service reform, but what we're saying is that it shouldn't be the one that will be interfering into the affairs of the public service in terms of the management of the public service.
And of course, we know that that is also something that's within the courts at the moment when it pertains to the DA and the ANC here in the country. And coming to Professor Mashupye Maserumule, one would say, what makes it so important to have the public sector, especially in our country when we've seen so much unrest and, of course, various, strikes and people just complaining about poor service delivery? Why is it so important to have the public sector professionalized?
Largely because of all those complaints that are coming from the public. Because remember that professionalizing the public, it is essentially about the commitment to institutionalize capability within the state. And if we do have that capability within the state, we will go a long way in terms of making sure that the public goods are delivered effectively, efficiently to the citizens, and therefore that will go a long way in terms of making sure that the citizens are happy. Because when we talk about the public good, the measure thereof ought to be the extent to which people are happy, the extent to which people are actually satisfied. And also remember that professionalizing the public service is actually a commitment that was made in the National Development Plan, and it was made as part of Chapter 18 of the National Development Plan, where it actually put more emphasis in actually professionalizing the public service is one of the key imperatives of building the capacity of the state. And that is very important, Mbali, because if a state is weak, a weak state tends to endanger democracy. And therefore, professionalization of the public service becomes critically important in terms of making sure that it contributes towards enhancing the capacity of the state and also making our democracy more stronger.
And, we know that, this came into effect last year in October when it comes to the finalization of the framework towards the professionalization of the public sector. I'm going to come to Professor Mandla. One would say that we are always told that South Africa is always very good in coming up, with, frameworks and ideas, but implementation always seems to be the stumbling block. Do you think that this retreat will be able to ensure that this framework is actually implemented?
That's a point that we've reached, hence the nature of the team that we've put together here. So we have all our partners who are very clear about the processes that we need to pursue in order to succeed in implementing our professionalization as a country. So it's not only just ourselves internally, there is different, sections of our government, particularly, the Department of Public Administration, Public Service and Administration, Department of Planning and Evaluation, our National School of Government, Treasury, ourselves from the side of the Public Service Commission, and so on. We have more partners beyond the state itself that is now from professional organizations. But what was of major interest in terms of the discussions as they were unfolding is that it's necessary for us not only just to forge those relationships at that level, but rather to bring partners beyond what in a traditional sense will have been understood, that we are going to be particularly forging relations also with the higher education sector when it comes to the question of qualifications that are going to be appropriate, to their areas that we are going to be pursuing in order to be guaranteed that professionalization of our own public sector, becomes a success story. But we also are bringing on board here the private sector, civil society, and so on and so forth. But we basically have agreed that we need to also go beyond that we need to galvanize our society so that as and when we talk about this major and momentous shift that we've reached at this point, that we are ready as society to play our role as well, because it is that kind of a broader understanding of where we are going as a country, the commitment about this developmental agenda of building this capable and developmental state is concerned, so that all of us actually are driving a clear-cut agenda. So it is to that extent that we are going to make a success of this. But we've been very clear about that we need to be very careful about ensuring that we don't run ahead of ourselves, so that as we put together this particular plan, that we then work out the mechanisms that guarantee that the content is the one that is actually going to make us to win. That is why beyond ourselves then internally, we have the UNDP that is supporting us that have brought in this particular retreat external experts, so that we have experts coming from countries where professionalization has actually been successful. And we then are saying to ourselves, because we have had that kind of exposure, let them then talk to our own partners internally so that we have that support, not only just as we work on the plan, but we are also going to be working beyond putting a plan together. We are going to be putting together, a peer review structure that is going to be taking the process forward. And beyond that particular structure that is going to be doing the running on an ongoing basis, we'll then have a steering committee that will be comprising of all the leaders of all our partners, so that this process is not only just taken care of by chance, but it's actually a rational process where beyond everything else, we are then going to be pursuing the agenda of ensuring that implementation sees the light of day.
And Dr. Ayodele, we've heard there from Professor Mandla saying that there are various plans which are afoot at the moment, of course, to ensure the success of this framework. At the same time, various partnerships which have also been formed. From your experience, what would you say is the best way to ensure that, these frameworks are implemented correctly?
Thank you very much, Mbali. When it comes to the issue of implementation of professionalizing the public service, the first thing is for us to look beyond the public service itself. And that's why the whole of society approach becomes critical. In this regard, the private sector, the civil society organization, the academia remain very critical in terms of how we make sure that every actor knows what he or she is supposed to deliver on. And in this regard, for implementation to be fully achieved, we strongly believe there is need for us to have a uniform public service. In South Africa, you have multiple public service, the one for the national, the province, as well for local government. They seem to be, in the past, not effectively harmonized. So the main elephant in the room, therefore, is a unified public service where we will have the same standard applicable to all in terms of character, in terms of conduct, in terms of competence. So that's one thing which we think is really very going to be important. And two, it is very important for us to have effective planning and monitoring indicators for success. We have to make sure this is set ab initio. It's not while we start the something we think about what will be the indicators for us to monitor. We have to set up what they call the monitoring indicators, and every year bring everybody to account in terms of kind of social compact that we might have developed, where all the actors will be effectively coordinated. In fact, one of the things we observe today is that if you look at the various actors, we have them together. And some of the areas where there seems to be some kind of misunderstandings are coming to emerge, and there seems to be emerging consensus around some of these issues. So we strongly believe in terms of implementation, we need to have effective coordination of the various partners. So in this regard, we really support a situation where we look at what are the issues and how do we address it collectively. So this will help us to really accelerate implementation, because it's not about reforming the public service alone, but also making sure that it delivers as it is expected. So in this regard, the role of UNDP is, as Professor Makhanya mentioned, is to look at where has this journey been done in the past, and what have they been able to do this? Can we then bring them together to come and discuss with us, so that we don't go through the same challenges that they've gone through? And on the basis of this, we can leapfrog such development and learn from them. So this is one of the things we intend to do, bringing the experience of best practices across the world to the country. And also to help us rethink some of the things that we have done in the past, because South Africa is not new when it comes to efficient public service. We've had a situation where the current ESCOM used to be one of the best in the world. And also, as we speak today, South Africa Revenue Services is one of the best globally. So how do we really make sure the experience we got within the countries in terms of best practices is brought to fore in this professionalization initiative we are putting in place? We strongly believe we have what it takes to make it work in South Africa.
And Professor Mashupye, coming to you now, when it comes to this, 2-day retreat, how confident are you that it will be able, to turn around the public service sector?
Mbale, I think that as a country, we are at a point where we cannot really afford to falter, particularly when coming to the question of making sure that the framework gets implemented. I had the opportunity to coordinate the activities that led towards the finalization of the framework. And we interacted with more than 700 submissions. We had so many consultations. The expectation out there, it's just so high. And therefore, we cannot afford to disappoint those people. I'm saying what I'm saying to emphasize that we do have an obligation in that retreat to come back with something that could immediately assist in terms of making sure that there are certain tangible action that ought to take place. And also, Mbali, remember that the issue that we are actually talking about is not a new issue at all. It has always been part of the type of the public service that we want to have in the post-apartheid South Africa. Remember, in as early as 1996, President Mandla appointed a commission to advise him about the type of the public service which could actually be appropriate to drive a democratic state, and the report to that effect was produced, and the report also did underscore the significance of a professional public service. We did not really do much until late that the NDP went back to say that we need to build the capacity of the state, and one of the key imperatives to that effect is professionalizing the public service. Yeah. The framework came, and therefore we should not repeat history of creating something that we don't implement. Like, as you said earlier on, we are well known by having great ideas, great policy, great institution, but we are very thin in implementing. We need to put that to a stop. We must make sure that we act on what we have actually committed ourselves to. I used to say that as a country, we don't have any problem of ideas. We have a problem of seeing them through, right? And therefore, we need to, with speed, move away from that.
And in closing, unfortunately, Professor Makhanya, we have run out of time. Maybe if you can just give us a bit of more insight in terms of what we can expect on the last day. Unfortunately, seems as if he is indeed frozen. Of course, as you can see, those three guests, thank you so much for joining us. Professor Makhanya, I'm going to try you again for the last time. Of course, tomorrow is the final day of the retreat. What else can we expect? Quickly, short, in a snapshot.
Well, I think, Bali, just in a snapshot, what you can expect from tomorrow is that we'll be breaking into commissions and then beginning the process in a direct sense of the word of now putting together, those portions of the work that is going to be then taken care of beyond the retreat itself. And as I indicated, that the review team that we're going to be putting together, that is going to be pulled out of all our partners, is the one that is now going to be spending more time, doing the running on the ground as we put the nuts and bolts, of our own implementation plan in place. But we'll continue with this work because it's not simply just a question of the work ending tomorrow, but rather that work that will be coming from our review team is going to be submitted, on interval basis, to our own steering committee. Once again, made up of the leadership of all these bodies, that are gathered here today.
All right then, gentlemen.
So failure is not an option. Yes.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. That is Professor Mandla Makhanya from the Public Service Commission, as well as Dr. Ayodele Odusola from the United Nations Development Programme and Professor Mashupye Maserumule from the National Planning Commission.